Hello and a very warm welcome to the CNBC TV18 special. Now, the pandemic has done what even demonetization could not do for digital payments in India. It has brought about a big shift in payments from cash towards digital, and hopefully one that is here to stay. Now, 5 years ago, for instance, the percentage of digital transactions as a share of retail payments was less than 10%, and now that has grown to over 25%. A study conducted by PRICE, or People Research on India's Consumer Economy and Citizen Environment, which is an independent not-for-profit research center, in partnership with the National Payments Council of India, or NPCI, has found that there was a visible change in behavior in how India pays across the country. It shows that over 1/3 of Indian households today are using digital payments in one form or another. What's even more heartening is that every 1 in 4 of the households in the bottom 40% of the income group that was studied is also using digital payments. Now, this suggests that a greater awareness and education about the use of payment apps, for instance, and interoperability features of UPI could propel the usage even more. Joining me now to discuss this further are the authors of this report on digital payment adoption in India through 2020, Praveena Rai, the Chief Operating Officer of NPCI, and Rama Bijapurkar, the co-founder of People Research on India's Consumer Economy and the Professor of Management Practice at IIM Ahmedabad. Ladies, thank you very much for joining us here on this special today, and thank you for taking time out. Ms. Bijapurkar, if I may start with you, the report findings are quite interesting. Almost 1/3 of the Indian population is now using digital payment in one form or another. What is the new consumer behavior trend you've observed, and what are the changes in the digital payment landscape that have occurred through the lockdown period and the unlock thereafter?
Well, it is heartening to see that the digital payments, that NPCI's mission, for example, to touch 1 billion customers, to touch 1 billion Indians, is well on its way. I'm always a little bit circumspect when I see supply-side numbers of transactions, because in India, as you know, you can have large numbers without touching large parts of the population altogether. So I think what we have actually found here, and we have done even though sampling is boring, I think it's important because it tells you whether you are representing who you're supposed to represent or not. So we actually took samples from low-income, middle-income, and high-income states, and we looked at the poorest 40% of India, the middle 40%, and the top 20%. So now the big surprise actually is, as you pointed out, the lowest income group, actually 1 out of 4 are using, and almost 1/3 of all the users that have come in have actually come in during the lockdown period. Per se, it's not surprising because you had very little other options. But I don't think we should be surprised too much about digital desire or acceptance on part of Indian consumers. Our temples went digital a long time back, and when temples go digital, everything else follows. So it is actually a supply-side story to be able to have managed to get the tools to the common person to be able to do this. So that's something that I observe. So no, there is, I think that the tide, as you say, has turned. The inflection point has happened. Of course, digital payments are still free, so I hope we don't have any, we may have a certain drop once we start pricing them, but by and large, I think the consumer is ready, willing, and waiting, and now it's over to the suppliers to build the environment.
Well, one of the people who's going to play a big role in that is NPCI. Praveena, to you then, what is the profile of these new users that have come in? How much of the lower income segment really is able to use digital today? Because that is the one place that can really turn the tide or bring about the inflection point that, Rama Bijapurkar was talking about.
No, absolutely true. And it's very heartening to see the demand side be so universal, so the bottom segment, the middle segment, the top segment, have all clearly in the report envisaged an interest in using digital payments. Far number of them actually use. Okay, numbers are stacking up, and what's the opportunity space? There are 14% of people who actually said that they don't use digital payments today, but they would like to. There is another 22% who possess a smartphone but don't make digital payments today. And another 23% who would like to try making a digital payment, but perhaps don't really possess a smartphone. So it really opens up and makes it very clear that there is such a large unmet demand. And as Rama rightly said, the supply side just has to stand up and make this happen. So there is an enablement story for those who want it and don't have it yet, the 14%. There's an awareness story around really getting the message on how to enable themselves for the rest of the group. And for the folks who don't yet have a smartphone or don't have access to a smartphone, the job is back to us to come up with the kind of products that do not need a smartphone for digital payment. So I think it's really for the supply side to take care of this, and the universality of the demand has become very clear to us from this report.
Ms. Bijapurkar, what are the various forms of digital payments that you found in your study that people are using now? From the numbers that I read, it seemed that the apps like PhonePe, Google Pay, Paytm seem to be more popular than the more well-entrenched online banking applications, for instance. What has been the observation?
I think the ubiquitousness of payment methods really has been driven from what we've seen by people like Paytm and PhonePe and so on, which is actually not a surprise. If you take a walk around your sabji wala and your fruit wala, at the back of the pad on which he writes, he has a QR code, and Google Pay as well. And so everyone knows how it gets used. So it just has become more ubiquitous. It has become easier, and everybody understands. The other thing is that you get the ting, ting, ting as soon as you've transferred. So I know nobody is taking me for a ride anywhere, and all that stuff is really phenomenal. As far as banks are concerned, I think also we must understand that 76% of all of India and as much as 86% of the lower income group, the bottom 40%, are public sector bank users. Not to bash public sector banks, because I think it's phenomenal, the kind of reach it has, but it is a little more cumbersome there for their banking apps. I mean, for example, anecdotally as well, we've not exactly investigated in our study why they don't use it, but anecdotally, we do know that a lot of these apps are not as user-friendly as the apps of Paytm and so on and so forth. You also have to go physically to the bank to be able to be allowed to do this, for good reason, I'm sure, to be allowed to enroll as an online banking user. And online banking, even the language is a bit of a problem. So I think as you go simplify, 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 the consumer actually, lower income consumers, we must understand, love anything digital for one reason. It's status blind service, right? As someone said, the ATM doesn't care whether I withdraw 2 rupees or 20 rupees, but the teller at the bank does. So the easier you make banking apps, the more accessible you make them, the more the public sector banks get their act together, the more NPCI helps them to get their act together. I think we are home and dry.
Well, that's heartening to hear. Praveena, then what is NPCI's plan here on? We saw UPI, for instance, have a tremendous success. It's crossed the 2 billion mark very quickly in a period of 1 year alone. When is the next 1 billion coming? How soon?
So I think we are clearly seeing the network effort kick in. Our research also tells us that the highest form of trial is created through word of mouth. So somebody calls their parent in a small town and says, hey, I'm going to transfer money to you, create a UPI ID for yourself. And that's kind of how this entire journey starts off. And we realized that there is still an awareness gap in understanding interoperability of UPI. So somebody thinks, I have a particular app, I need the same app if I were to create a payment. So awareness of a UPI ID, what is my UPI ID, being able to communicate my UPI ID to somebody. Every sabji wala that I mentioned today has a QR code or a UPI ID. And knowing that it can be made from any bank app or any payment app is going to be the key. So a lot of this awareness building around interoperability, around what is UPI ID, and I think that kind of bridges a big gap there. And the safety aspects of UPI and more digital payment systems, an understanding of the UPI PIN. You need that 4-digit or 6-digit PIN, just like an understanding of the sacrosanct nature of the ATM PIN. An understanding of the UPI PIN, and our research tells us that about 50% of users really understand how important that PIN is for safety and security. So we do, as we get more and more users using UPI, building the awareness and letting them understand this is going to be critical.
Well, absolutely. Hold your thoughts there. We have to take a very short break on that note, but we'll be right back to continue this conversation on the other side. Welcome back to the CNBC TV18 special, where we're in conversation with Rama Bijapurkar, co-founder of Price and professor at IIM Ahmedabad, and Praveena Rai, the COO at NPCI. Praveena, we were talking about the rise in the use of UPI, but at the same time, the transaction failure rates have also been rising in tandem. A lot of players also blame it on the fact that there is zero MDR and therefore not enough incentive for banks to invest. What is your take on the matter?
So certainly volumes have increased exponentially in the pandemic. I think the India Pay Safe campaign is something that we ran with UPI Chalega, driving volumes towards UPI, people really looking for digital payments as a safe way to pay. And the ecosystem had to be prepared for the volumes. And I think a number of those upgradations, so to say, have already been done. And I think we are on a good track there. So things are progressing. More work to be done, much more work to be done, because the volumes are increasing, and we are expecting more users to be onboarded. We looked at the numbers. I think the supply side needs to do what is needed to address the demand that's there in the market. And we are looking at the entire ecosystem stepping up and doing what's required.
Rama, there have also been these recent incidents of failures when it comes to banking applications of HDFC Bank. We've seen it with SBI, even with ICICI Bank. At the same time, when digital payments are rising, are banks not investing enough in infrastructure at this point of time? Does that remain a big cause of concern?
I don't really know what the answer to that is. The banks that I bank with certainly have very good digital apps and digital banking. But I think the fact is that it takes time. I think the point about the ecosystem is important. I think for all these things we say ecosystem, but the ecosystem is really a chain which is as weak as the weakest link. So if you have, for example, I anecdotally know of someone who had a problem with a banking correspondent, and he banks with a cooperative bank in a village. Now, there is, of course, systems of redressal and so on and so forth, but for the entire ecosystem to become strong, I think you need an evangelist in the middle. I mean, to give you an analogy, the dairy ecosystem in India that we so celebrate happened because it was evangelically driven, and every single player was doing his bit to drive it. I think we are on that journey, but you have to also know that there are a large number of banks. And you have to, for example, I think if you want to get a mobile application going on your bank, if you have to go to a public sector bank branch, and then the person asks you to come 3 times, and then there are also lots of things in terms of lots of constraints in terms of how many times. I see it for my household staff, how many times you can put money in and how much money you can put in and how many times you can take it out. So I think that not to look at each little bit by itself doesn't make sense. I think holistically the entire system has to upgrade itself, and that is work in progress. But and this is not honestly the only industry in India where the consumer is ready, but the supplier is not. So that is the nature of the beast. I think it will take time for everything to upgrade.
All right, but what do you make of some of the recent regulatory changes in this area? For instance, there's a number of things RBI has announced. Offline payments, they've announced a new umbrella entity, for instance, for digital payments. They've invited applications for that, a regulatory sandbox. What do you make of some of these changes? Are they real game changers?
I think Praveena would have to answer that question, because I look at the people side of the world. But I will tell you that the more options you can offer to the customer, for example, it's not a 2-horse race of, oh, should UPI win, should RuPay win, should NPCI win, should someone else win. I'm giving you an example from the airline industry before some of the airlines went bust. When 1,000 flowers bloom on the supply side, 1,000 flowers will bloom on the customer side. As a result of the industry being the way it is, it does need regulation. I think we can't get away from that. Now, some customers want wallets because they don't want to expose their bank account. Some customers want money to go directly into the bank account, क्योंकि आज मेरे को 1,000 रुपया दिया तो कल मेरे को ATM से पैसे निकालना है. So I think we really need more and more products. I mean, AEPS, for example, we've been seeing it. The banking mitras reach from our data is also pretty phenomenally high. So you need more customer-focused solutions. And I would think about, I mean, I don't speak for NPCI, but I would think about NPCI partly as the body that can incentivize an entire ecosystem to come. So I think the more the better. Regulation is for our own protection. I think if you ask me what is the weakest link in the chain, I sometimes think the weakest link in the chain is how you empower customers to take care of, to use these things and to take care of themselves. And while everyone says we do financial literacy, I mean, if someone just spoke in a simple language instead of a supply side language of, pins and gadgets and gizmos and networks, and, I still haven't understood, and Pravina will kill me for saying this is the UPI attached to my app or is it attached to a bank account, but never mind, the whole thing works, right? So we've seen that with iPads, we've seen that with smartphones. Everybody, 95% of data on smartphones, but when you ask them, do you have data? Maybe it is, maybe not. If you say, आपके smartphone पे WhatsApp चलता है क्या? Everybody says, हाँ, मेरे smartphone पे WhatsApp चलता है. So I think we also have to get a little more customer-centered in the way we empower customers to take care of themselves.
Well, absolutely. Customer education is very important because, as you said, it any system is as strong as the weakest link in the chain. But Pravina, I want you also to comment on some of these regulatory changes because they are important for the digital payment industry, specifically the Payment Infrastructure Development Fund, and RBI set an ambitious target of almost 30 million digital acceptance. That kind of a target, do you think achievable, ambitious?
Absolutely. So I think the regulatory aspect has been, while Rama said, giving the control and the protection, I think it's been a great enabler. So the limit of 2,000 that we have for contactless payments has really led to the proliferation of contactless terminals, issuance of contactless cards. For RuPay, a number of our cards, are getting converted to contactless. Nearly all cards that are issued now are contactless. This is on what we call the NCMC card, the National Common Mobility Card. So we were so happy the Delhi Metro went live on a fully interoperable the RuPay NCMC card framework on transit. So this is an example of the offline regulation that you spoke about. And RBI is now also permitted offline in retail. So that's now getting piloted. We've opened it up to pilot. We've started seeing some early transactions. So the regulations have been big, significant enablers. On RuPay, we've also launched the soft POS, right? It's like, any small merchant, just like how QR has revolutionized the acceptance for the Sabjiwala with UPI.
Yeah.
He can just use his phone and convert his phone into an acceptance device. It's called the RuPay soft POS. So that's something that is now available, and in an offline mode, i.e., even if he's not on a network or he's in a remote location, it will still enable a transaction to go through. So that's the beauty of it, and that's in pilot stage.
Okay.
The fund that you spoke about, we are looking at this really as a 5 se 50 kind of thing. So we want to take it to 30 million, 50 million, and I think that opportunity exists, and it will not be too far away.
Okay, so we're running out of time. We cannot end the discussion without talking about online frauds, data security, cyber security. Rama Bijapurkar, these are some of the obvious problems, and we've spoken about how education of customers is important. But is there anything else, other solutions that we can work towards? How can these challenges be overcome? Briefly.
We've actually seen software solutions that overcome some of these challenges. For example, I think we also underestimate the humble SMS. You do a penny testing and it comes through, and so then you say, okay, let me send a little more money. As far as frauds are concerned, I think there has to be, from a consumer protection point of view, I think we have to do a lot more in terms of telling people where they're accountable, what are all the things that make you accountable for a fraud that has happened, and what are things that are not your business. Right now, it all sits in no man's land, and I think that has to go. So I think we need more clarity as far as those are concerned. But I think software processes can actually help people be more confident. Our study shows that safety and ease of usage trumps cashbacks. So I don't know why everyone's doing so many cashbacks. They should just put that money into trying to make it safer.
Okay, Pravina, your thoughts on the same? And, the budget is coming up. So any expectations from the payments point of view as well that you could spell out for us?
Yeah, so, let me take what Rama said. The humble SMS is such a powerful tool in managing this fraud risk for customers. And what we really loved out of this report is 80% of customers across all the segments, including the low segment, are aware and they are receiving this SMS. And you will know it's one of the very strong regulatory guidelines we have in the banking and payment sector. So every transaction has a debit SMS or a credit SMS. So if you get a SMS that says, hey, your account has been debited for 500 rupees, and you know that you were nowhere near an ATM or a transaction, then you know there's a problem, right? And you have a call here linked to it.
Sure.
So the SMS, the fact that people are getting these SMSs, are aware of these SMSs, and are using these SMSs, is giving them a lot of confidence to then actually use the digital payments. And
okay.
I'll come to AEPS, we kind of didn't talk much about it.
Yeah.
But the fact that people are getting this SMS and using it is giving them the confidence that 20% of them are retaining their money back in their account
Sure.
rather than withdrawing it completely, right? It goes back to the confidence that is getting built up.
Yeah.
And the element that you spoke about.
Just the very last word on what you're expecting, or anything you'd like the finance minister to announce to enable even more digital payment adoption in the country.
So I think any incentive in this area is good. The industry has done its needful. RBI has put its a good budget in place.
Yeah.
And we are supported with the union budget, and I think it's great. It will help that supply side pick up even more, as we discussed.
Okay, Ms. Bijapurkar, the last word to you.
But please don't, my expectation of the budget on this one would be, please don't fix what ain't broke. Just give us a chance to flower a little more, and then, we can then figure out. So don't do anything that causes collateral damage in this space. Also.
All right, don't fix what ain't broke. Thank you so much, both of you, Rama Bijapurkar and Praveena Rai, for taking time out and joining us here on CNBC TV18. With that, it is a wrap on this CNBC TV18 special. Thank you for watching.